National Eating Disorder Awareness Week, I thought we would talk about eating disorders and how prevalent they are in our United States. And each one of you that are on here, you know about them. Some of you have them. Some of you treat them. Some of you treat, and it is a really, we work with all addictions. And I will tell you, the eating disorder is the hardest to, I believe, treat and to recover from. Now, I don't want to be doom and gloom. Absolutely, we can recover. I'm a prime example of recovery. But it took me many years to get the information about that I had a disease. I always thought I was just weak-willed or I was a glutton. I had no idea it was a disease, and I was working in the addiction field every day with drug addicts and alcoholics, and I knew they had a disease, and I so wanted to be able to go someplace to treat. We didn't call it an eating disorder then. I called it compulsive overeating. And I was a member of the Fellowship of Overeaters Anonymous since 1972, but I couldn't get honest with what I was doing with the food. I could never get honest, and I'd go on those diets, and a diet is something to go on so you can go off of it. Like a budget. We have a budget, so we can go off of the budget, So we teach here is to have a food plan, a plan of eating, and have a spending plan to spend your money. If any of you have money issues, and one of these days I'm going to do another one on money, because eating disorder people particularly a lot of times will have compulsive spending. They come a lot of times. Addictions of any sort come in clusters, and I think with eating disorders, it's like the eating disorder, and a lot of times in recovery will show up love and sex addiction, not all the time, but we see it a lot, and then compulsive spending, So I just want to go over eating disorders, and I always like to do a little research before, I know a lot about eating disorders, but how much do I know? None of us know everything. And, the fact of the matter is I'm always looking, I'm always open to what might help a client. And, there's a lot out there about anorexia and bulimia. There's a lot of research. There is a lot of ways to treat it, and there's a lot said about anorexia, nervosa, and bulimia. Very little about compulsive overeating. Almost zero about morbid obesity. Most of your people in the eating disorder field do not believe that compulsive overeating, and it has showed up in the DSM, the diagnostic book. It has shown up as binge eating, but nothing really about morbid obesity. And so I could find very little about morbid obesity. I did find an article I just put in, is morbid obesity considered an eating disorder? And it said no, that it is a behavior. It is a behavior, and that people with that are morbidly obese usually do not have the psychological problems, psychiatric problems that anorexics and bulimics have. And I absolutely do not believe that from the population that we have treated. I do not believe that at all whatsoever. And I think what fools people a lot of times in the field, if they really don't understand compulsive overeating and morbid obesity, is that they don't realize that the reason that a lot of your overweight people do not present with a lot of issues, a lot of problems, because we manage to eat them away. We manage to stuff them down with massive amounts of food, or I know I did. When it was presented to me about that there was a treatment center in LA that I could go to, I didn't know that there was a place for folks like us. And, I found out on Thursday, by Wednesday, I was sitting in that treatment center in LA. And I am grateful, been grateful every day that I didn't go to a treatment center that didn't use the 12 steps. Now, because that's my language. That's what I was teaching the drug addicts, alcoholics every day, every day, every day at the treatment center where I was program director here in Abilene. So that was my language. That's what I knew that people could recover from. But my problem was getting sober around the food, getting sober. Now, what I mean getting sober around the food, I could go on a diet and I would lose 100, 140, and I have some few pictures around, and every once in a while I look at them and I think, oh, well, you look pretty good there. That was right after losing about 120 pounds. And, and I would keep it down for a very short period of time, maybe 15 minutes, and then I'd go back to eating, because when I would lose the weight, that's when the pain of living would come up and I wouldn't know what to do with it. And so I am very glad, like I said, that I went to the treatment center. And I want to remind y'all probably know, and this is actually the original book that I got out there, and you can tell it's all yellow. But Dr. Judy Hollis, who wrote Fat is a Family Affair, this book had just come out. When she opened a treatment center in a dingy little psychiatric center in LA. And anyway, when I got there, there was only 2 of us. And for a couple of weeks, there was only 2 of us in treatment. But I got what I needed. And it completely changed my life. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about Judy, is that she was Betty Ford's therapist in Long Beach Naval Hospital for addiction when Betty Ford was out there, and she treated her. She was her primary therapist. And one day Judy was on her way to speak or something, anyway, walked by a full view window, and she saw her reflection in that glass. And she looked and she thought, well, that woman has on the same dress that I have on. Denial is the number one symptom of any addiction. Denial. Don't even know I'm lying. She didn't know she was lying to herself when she looked there, and, she saw, somebody that weighed about 240 pounds, but she didn't realize that it was her. And then she did, deep down she knew it was her. And then she got to thinking, why can I work with these alcoholics and drug addicts and they get well and I can't stop eating? So she started using the same principles that she was teaching her drug alcohol clients. And I'm very grateful for that, because when she opened the center in LA, yes, we did a lot of eating disorder specific treatment. We did body image work. We did gentle eating, mindful eating. We had nutrition. We had a dietitian. We looked at the food. We looked at, everything. But the primary modality for treatment was the 12 steps. And so that's why I've implemented it here at Shades. And the reason I've implemented it here at Shades is that because it works. It works when nothing else does. And it also gives people a place to go when they leave here. They're already working with a sponsor when they get here. They find one, we help them find one. And then if they will continue that work that they have done here, when they go home, they're going to recover. There is no failure to it. Absolutely zero failure. And what I got out there, I got sober around the food. Got sober around the food for the first time since I was 4 years old. And what my drug of choice was, and I'll tell you, it's not the drug of choice of every eating disorder person. Many do have an addiction or a problem with sugar or high carbs. Not everyone does. And the guideline that Judy says, and I believe it, is the guideline for any addiction is if you can take it or leave it. if you're not an alcoholic and if it's not against your religion to drink, you can have a can of beer on a hot summer day or a glass of wine at dinner. But if you're an alcoholic and you've got the brain of an alcoholic, you might drink that one glass of wine with dinner with a business partners or family, but what it will do, it will trigger the craving of alcohol. And you may not pick up another drink for a few days, but it'll be in your mind, that mental obsession thinking. And that's where we have to look with food addiction and food eating disorders, is what is your drug of choice? And like I said, it may not be sugar, but for a lot of us, it is sugar. I was addicted to sugar as any alcoholic ever could be with alcohol or drugs. And I went through a withdrawal. Now, another thing, I practiced bulimia 13 years before had lost down to 195 pounds, and I was going to gain every pound of that back. So I started, I'm not going to go into it, but anyway, I started taking laxatives, and it's like any other drug. And this is where eating disorder people, I consider the things that we use like diuretics and laxatives, anything to get that food out, I see it as a drug. And I was a drug addict when it came to laxatives and diuretics. If I was using cocaine or any other drug, I had the same mental obsession about using laxatives and diuretics as any drug addict or alcoholic that I've ever seen. So, like any drug, I started taking 1 or 2 and 3 and 4 and 6 and 8 and 10, and it increased because they quit working. And how they would help me, I would overeat, and immediately, a lot of times while I was eating the meal, immediately I would take laxatives. And I did that for 13 years, and they quit working. They stopped working. So I had to increase them and increase them and increase them. By the end of that 13 years, September the 19th of 1985, when I entered treatment, I was up to taking about 100 to 125 X-Lax a day. When I started taking them, they were in loose bottles, and I could just, get them out, and it was very easy. Before I went to treatment, years before, they started putting them in those foiled packages, where you had to get them out with your thumb. When I went to treatment, I had a cord on the end of this thumb from getting those laxatives out of those foil packages. That's how many I used. And I didn't tell anyone. This is a very secret disease. Now for the weight, for us that, I was morbidly obese, the weight is out there for all the world to see. They can see that we have a problem with food. But when you're anorexic, or unless, in bulimics, the object of bulimia is to keep the weight down. And it took a lot. It took a lot of the laxatives to keep me from gaining all of that weight back. So I went into treatment about 195 pounds. So to say that is, I'm grateful that I was treated through the 12-step process. I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for every assignment that we did. The body image. I would only look from the neck up, not the neck down. And, that started when I was so severely overweight and ate myself up to 287 pounds. I couldn't look at my own body. I couldn't touch my body. I hated myself. I hated my own guts. So anyway, and that's just kind of a entry in, because all of you know, probably all you know my story. And, yes, we were treated for our eating disorder and touched a little bit, a little dab on what was going on underneath, what was driving the eating disorder. Just a little bit on our history, not much. just a little bit. And I think one of the reasons for that is Hollis was out on the road most of the time with her book, marketing her book. But when she was in, she did some very good work. But there wasn't a lot of emphasis put on what was driving anything that was underneath, and very little family of origin. And so when I came home, what happened to me is I was an empty shell. I was an empty vessel. It's like I had a hole in my soul that food had filled up for years and years and years. And what started coming up for me big time, was I knew all of the stuff that was coming up, but I had pushed it down so far where I wouldn't have to feel it every day, and I had never I finally told about the I'd never told a single soul about the sexual abuse. No, I had never told a single soul about the sexual abuse that my dad sexually abused me till I was 13. I told a lot of my story, and particularly about the story about being my mother's caretaker and going to school very little, not having a life, and she took drugs and alcohol, and I ate food, and that food did for me what drugs and alcohol did for her. But I never had worked on those underlying core issues. Never. And so they started coming up big time. And I knew that I wasn't equipped to treat anyone for them. I knew I wasn't. And there wasn't a single therapist in Abilene that I could hire for the Serenity House that could do that. I mean, no one was trained. We wasn't trained in it. And so I'm a seeker of truth. So I can't think of her name. It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, Weisinger, I can't think of her name. Anyway, I found a book written by, no, I went to Austin to a drug addict alcoholic meeting, workshop. It was like a 3-day deal. And I met Sharon Weisinger Cruz. That's who I'm thinking about. She did a lecture a whole workshop on family systems and talked about the family system. And that got my attention. And she was really the first one that I've ever heard that up to that point that really talked about childhood abuse and how people were affected by it. And so I found out that she had a training, and I promptly signed up for it. And it was up at Rapid City, South Dakota. It was an 8-day training, and in that 8-day training, and this was in. By that time, I had come out here, had opened the treatment center, and this was in 1989 that I went up there. And in learning to train for what we do here in working with clients and do a lot of experiential type of therapy and looking at the family system, what happened for me is all of my my sexual abuse issues came up. And they were powerful, and it's like choking me to death. And they would say, put a bookmark. All of us were clinicians, and they wouldn't let us work on our own issues. And they just say, put a bookmark there. And I knew I had to get some help for that. Well, there was a woman in there in my group that, Barbara Caraway from Stuart, Florida. This is where you have to be very careful and pay attention to people that are put in your path, because they're going to be your teachers. A lot of times we're going to learn what things not to do, but also some are going to teach us what to do. Now, I learned as much, if not more, from Barbara Caraway about treating families and family systems, and also how to treat survivors. I learned as much, if not more, from Barbara than I did Sharon and her group, because Barbara had done the full training at the Caron Foundation, and the Caron Foundation is a training, but it's also a treatment center, and they focus mainly on, they were some of the first to start talking about codependency. And so Barbara had trained, and she was treating codependency, and she was treating and working with people that had been sexually abused. So I promptly went down to Stuart, Florida, And for many years, I would go to Florida to her house and her business. She had an outpatient program. And I went down there for 3 or 4 times a year, every year, every year, every year until she passed away. Now, the thing about Barbara is Barbara was a recovering alcoholic, had lots of recovery from alcoholism. She was a recovering smoker, but she was a severe compulsive overeater and never treated it. Now, her brother owned a treatment center that treated eating disorders, and he would call me periodically. Can you work with Barbara? And I said I could, but she denies that it's a problem. My friend Barbara was morbidly obese, and she helped a lot of people. But Barbara died of obesity, and I'm sad to say that, because she could not stop the eating. She could not stop the overeating. And finally, I had to quit going down there. I couldn't go. I couldn't watch her eat the amounts of food. Now, she would take everything out of her house. I'd stay at her house. She'd just take out everything out of her house that she knew that wasn't on my food plan. But one time I was looking for something, and she was in with the client, because she'd see clients in her house and she had an office in town. And I opened the storage building in her garage, and there was all the food that she had taken out. It was full of every kind of snack. Anyway, it was packed. So then I knew that she wasn't on anybody's food plan, and it hurt my heart to watch Barbara, because she was one of the best, and still is, one of the best clinicians, one of the best therapists I've ever known. And she died of compulsive overeating. She worked with every one of my family members except my son. When she got really bad, she was on a bed, a king-size bed, and she couldn't get up because she had breathing problems. And this is caused from, they would say it was from, it was started with her smoking, but it was aggravated tremendously by her overeating. She couldn't breathe. She had gained so much weight. So my daughter Kim, who all of my children loved Barbara, loved and adored, she was like their grandmother. So she went down and stayed with her nieces while Barbara was dying. And she wasn't there when Barbara passed away. I think she passed away a couple of days after Kim left. But Kim said that there was food all over Barbara's bed. And she was from North Carolina, and her nieces were there and was cooking all that good special stuff from North Carolina that she liked. I'm not going to say it all, but one of the things they would make, and Barbara would tell me about it, how she loved homemade North Carolina biscuits to dip in whipped cream. Can you imagine that? And her bed was covered with food, and Kim sent me pictures of it. And I knew I couldn't go down there. I knew I couldn't. I did not want to watch her die. It'd be like going in and watching an alcoholic on their bed dying while drinking. And I wasn't willing to go. I just couldn't. I wanted to remember Barbara as healthy as she was, the times that I knew her in spite of her weight. And we'd have her out here 2-3 times a year to work with our survivors, our sexual abuse survivors. And then Barbara and I, through her brother, who owned a lot of 27 treatment centers in the South, we had the opportunity. Barbara's the one who taught me about codependency. I'd never heard about I'd heard in LA when I was in treatment, everybody was co-ing someone else. Well, I'm a co-alcoholic, or I'm a co-this, co-that. That was the only time I'd ever heard about codependency, till I met Barbara. And Barbara taught more about the codependency that Sharon Weisinger Cruz talked about, the codependency of the caregiving, giving yourself away. And that's very important to talk about that. But I still knew that there was a little something missing. I didn't know what that something missing was, but I knew there was something missing. And so Barbara and I had the opportunity They brought a group of Russians over here. They were going to put in drug and alcohol units in Russia. And there was a whole group of them that went all over the United States to different treatment centers, and then they wanted them to be exposed to codependency. So they hired me and Barbara down in Florida. I went down, and we worked with them 1 week to teach them about codependency. And Father Martin, out of pioneer in the alcoholism field, he was in that group. Anyway, I'm just saying that to say I had a lot of training in alcoholism, drug addiction, codependency. And Father Martin got me off to the side and he said, I hear you treat eating disorders. And I said, I do. And he told me how long he had been sober. And he said, what I cannot recover from is compulsive overeating. I can't stop eating. And he had a housekeeper, and I said, why don't you get your housekeeper to do a food plan? Well, I've done that, and then I get mad at her and threaten to fire her if she doesn't start feeding me what I want. And he said, do you think it would help me to come to your treatment center? And I said, of course it would. He never made it here. Right after that, the bottom fell out of the treatment business. Anyway, I won't go into all of that. So I'm just saying this, that there are so many people that I've known in the field that have died of eating disorders, and they're wonderful, members of the treatment business, but that's one area, smoking and eating disorders that therapists themselves have suffered from, that a majority of them never want to touch. So I kept working with Barbara, and I knew there was something missing, and I had a friend that I met, Dr. Ann Worth in Dallas. I'm sorry, Ann's not on here. And so through learning what I had learned from Sharon at North Dakota, I was doing what we call breaking free weekends, breaking free from codependency, 3 days. And they're powerful. And I want to go back doing some of those 3 days. But I was doing them, and I called on Ann Worth. I had a marketer there, and so she introduced me to Ann, and I was telling Ann about what we did, and that we really looked at childhood issues. That's when I really started looking at childhood issues and how that core pain is inside, and until we work on that core pain, we're going to switch addictions to find something to ease the pain. So I met Ann, even went that weekend and did a breaking free in her office for a group of people that she put together. But also in doing that, she told me about Pia Mellody. This is why you have to pay close attention to who's put in your life. And be aware, because, I'm going to give myself some credit. I've been looking for answers since I was a little girl, and so I've always had my ears peaked for what's new out there. How can we help people? So Ann is the one who introduced me to Pia Mellody, and introduced me to her first book, Facing Codependence, not codependency. And so she was bringing Pia to Dallas to do workshops. And so I went to one of Pia's workshops, and bingo, I heard what I needed to hear about working with that inner child. Yeah, we'd been having I'd heard about inner child work. In adult children of alcoholics and all of that, where people were going to board meetings and carrying, teddy bears to work with them and all of that. And I believed in that, and I still do, the adult children of alcoholic movements, but I still thought there was a lot missing. That missing piece was about the abuse that children suffer in the different forms of childhood abuse that children suffer. And I will tell you, Pia Mellody and her husband at that time, Pat Mellody, are the two that put that book together, and the information, I believe it was absolutely God-given to Pia Mellody, because she had been sexually abused, and she was an alcoholic, and she didn't realize she had an eating disorder that she called anorexia until she met me. So long story short, I met Pia and I knew I had to train with Pia. So there I had trained with Sharon, and I've been up to South Dakota 3 different times and trained with Sharon Weisinger Cruz to learn to do what we do at Shades now. And I knew I wanted to do Pia's training, and Pia was just doing her first training. And I would go to Dallas and went many weekends, drove up there and paid a lot of money to go train under Pia Melody. And so that was where I learned to do the work, the shame and anger reduction work, a lot of the work that we do at Shades on children that have had any form of abuse. And so I'm telling you all of that to say, yes, this is Eating Disorder Awareness Week. And as looking through the research, and I am not putting down any treatment center, do not hear me do that. I am for every treatment center, and I'm for anything that might help a client. But when people start looking for treatment centers for drugs, alcohol, eating disorder, any addiction, what I say, you best find a treatment center that's going to take you back to your childhood and look at whatever baggage that you're carrying around with you. It may be grief, it may be some form of childhood abuse, it may be something. But if you treat just the eating disorder, and I'm a firm believer in this, if that's all you treat, I don't think you're going to completely recover. I think you might trade off another addiction, or I think that people continue to to practice an eating disorder. So with that, I want to say eating disorders are as prevalent as they have ever been. In fact, the field is growing. It is, alcoholism. We have made a lot of headway in the disease of alcoholism and eating disorder. Drug addiction because of education and people really working in the field of alcoholism and drug addiction. The eating disorder use businesses or treatment is fairly new. I mean, we've been here 34 years, and 36 years ago, I didn't know one treatment center in the United States until I found out the one about in LA. And then later I found out that there were a few scattered around in the United States. Now, after she wrote this book, Fat is a Family Affair, and then after I wrote this book, Shades of Hope, How to Stop Dieting and Start Living, and we have had the privilege of doing a program for the OWN Network on Addicted to Food. That was almost 11 years ago. I'll tell you folks, I'm not taking any credit or any blame, but there are eating disorders on every block in the United States now. And I think it is because information is getting out there. People are recognizing eating disorders more. Used to, the only ones that really got much help was anorexics. And anorexia has the highest death rate of any of the psychiatric diagnoses. Bulimia and anorexia both are psychiatric diagnoses. And now they've added binge eating. But as I started this, nothing about morbid obesity. Nothing. Zero. I'm hoping treatment centers are treating it and really treat it like we do. I don't know that, so I'm not complaining. I'm just saying my awareness of what I looked up could not find that. I could not find where people are treating morbid obesity, compulsive overeating, like they do the intensity of anorexia and bulimia. And what we do with every client that we have, we take them back to that childhood and we look at what it's not to blame anyone. There's no one, no parent, nothing is to blame for any addiction. But we must look at what has gone into the brain of a child that was painful, so painful that when, anorexia is so prevalent and it goes down younger and younger and younger. What makes a 13-year-old little girl want to not eat? It's not always parents. It is change. You know, we had a little girl years ago when we first started. We did treat adolescents, but I wouldn't take the adolescent without taking the mother, because you're wasting your time if you don't treat the mother and the father, particularly the mother, right along. So I had a 13-year-old here with her mother, and it was a good family. I mean, they were. I mean, they could have been a model family. We couldn't find one single solitary thing, that was even looked like abuse. Nothing. But a day in the life of a child is much different than a day in the life of an adult. This 13-year-old, she was raised in a very modest 3-bedroom ranch-style house. Her dad was a fireman. Her mom was a stay-at-home mom. They had a modest income, but a great family, churchgoers, working in the community. We couldn't see one thing there that would, cause this or get this kid to stop eating until we heard more of the story. That's why we want the story here. We have people write their, first step and then the autobiography. We want the story. We need to see everything that happened to a client that might have had an influence of where they are today. So this fireman had a wealthy aunt, and he was the only, and she was very, very wealthy. He was the only survivor. He had really even kind of forgotten about that aunt. When she died, he inherited every bit of her fortune. It completely changed their life. Before, she had, the little 13-year-old had an older sister, and they had rooms next to each other. And her little sister mothered her a lot, and they would talk. She loved her big sister, and she taught her how to dress, and she was a good big sister and would let her be around her peers and all of that. So they got this money. They built this big, huge 2-story house. You following me? This is a family with zero abuse. On one end of that 2-story house was her sister's bedroom. They wanted her to have a little privacy because she was getting ready to go off to college. One end of the hall, way down there at the other end of the hall, was her sister's room. And that was what started her not eating. She made up that her sister didn't have enough time for her. She made up that she couldn't go in her sister's room. What I'm making up, this is what she thought. And she wanted her sister's attention. And she stopped eating. And she never told this to a person till she came here, and then told her mother and told us. Now, it's subtle things like that, subtle things. Our clients, and I've got some gentlemen here now that think that we're nuts for wanting to look at their childhood. We're not in there. We're not witch hunters wanting to look and see, what bad things happen to in their childhood. A lot of bad things do happen to people in their childhood, and that's what we want to address and look at. But sometimes it's something as small as moving a kid all the way down the hall from her big sister and losing that closeness, that contact with them, And I could tell you many stories like that, many stories. So that's why we do more, and I'm sure other treatment centers do too. I don't know, but we do more than just get the food in order. For a compulsive overeater, we get that food in order overnight. I mean, the first meal they get here, the food's in order. We feed them, teach them how to eat. I will say there are no good or bad foods, and I want you to hear that. Now, I will tell you, for your compulsive overeaters and bulimics and some anorexics, they do get that addiction to sugar. We have had anorexics come in and bring bags of hard candy. Now, that's all they're eating, and they may eat 1 or 2 pieces a day, but they eat the sugar for the energy. So there are anorexics who get addicted to sugar. So our food plan, our meal plan is we detox people from sugar. We treat alcoholics. alcohol is made up mostly of sugar. So we take them off of sugar, high carbs, and we feed them 3 balanced meals a day. And our alcoholics and our drug addicts a lot of times come in malnourished. They are not eating appropriately. They'll eat fast food or not eat. They drink, they take drugs. So we put everyone basically on the same meal plan. So we give them nutritious food. Now, no problem feeding the compulsive overeater. They eat. And how we know what to work with the compulsive overeater. Most of your compulsive overeaters will come in, they're happy, joyous, and free, they're sweet, and they're eat up most of the time with codependency. They have been taking care of the world, and they get their good feelings out of taking care of the world and their kids, and they're upset that their kids aren't doing what they want them to do, but they're just jolly, fun people. Now, you put them on a meal plan, and in 3 days, at least, usually it's less than that, those heifers and men get angry. The anger comes up because they're not stuffing those feelings down with food. Massive amounts of food. They get plenty of food here, but it's 3 meals a day and nothing in between, and a snack at night. And what we say is go live your life between meals. That's not your life, by the way. You just fill your engine up. You fuel your body with that food, then you go live your life. And so if we want to, see what a compulsive overeater is dealing with, get them on a meal plan. And they can be the hatefulest things, and they're the ones that'll start looking at us and I don't think you know what you're doing, or they'll start gossiping among the other clients. They'll find fault with everything we do. And we want that anger to come up, because that's what we work with, because we know they brought it in with us. We did not assign it to them at the door. When you see a compulsive overeater, you see somebody that's overweight, morbidly obese, and really morbid obesity has been, to tell you the truth, is 20% over your normal weight, 20%. And that's obesity. Morbid obesity is like at least 100 pounds overweight, but obesity is 20% over your normal weight. So when I don't know where I was going with that, but what was my last thing? That's what we need, what we know that we need to work on is when we help them get the food in order. I don't know where I was going with that.
You're talking about the meal plan in 3 days, it comes up.
Okay. So that is getting them sober. That's what sobriety is for a compulsive overeater. And your bulimics. And guess what? Your anorexics. That's what sobriety looks like. Now, sometimes when we get an anorexic, and they are the most difficult of the eating disorders to treat, is anorexia. That is self-starvation. And I do believe, and from hearing what they say, I've treated many of them, and, have a daughter that's in recovery from anorexia. Anorexics get more out of the disease of anorexia than compulsive overeaters do of compulsively overeating. One thing, when you don't eat, what it does, it kicks in your own brain chemicals, the endorphins. And what an anorexic gets, they get high off of their own brain chemistry. They get feeling, and I hear them, if I can just get past those hungry pains. Say, I used to think anorexics didn't get hungry. Well, after working with them, absolutely they get hungry. But that's the challenge. They love that challenge of getting past the hunger. Once they get past the hunger, bingo, those endorphins kick in, and they are powerful, and they're like 20 feet tall and bulletproof. And, so the refeeding process for an anorexic is very difficult. And one of the things, you cannot feed them too fast, or they will get sick. So you have to do that gradual adding. We don't talk about calories. It's not about that. It is about the nourishment, getting the nourishment in the body to make a person's body function, whether they're compulsive overeaters, anorexics, or bulimics. And an anorexic, if you want to bring up feelings in an anorexic, and like a typical anorexic, like there's a typical anything, most of your anorexics come in, and a lot of your bulimics, particularly if they have bulimic anorexia, a lot of your anorexics will come in and they'll be, hunched over, and they'll be covered up. It may be 100 degrees outside, but they'll have on sweaters and want caps, and they'll be wrapped up in layers of clothes. One thing, they don't want anybody to see their body. And another thing, some of them are cold. They're cold because their body temperatures are down so low. Some of them are down to almost death rate, depending on the weight loss. So they come in very withdrawn, very guarded. Most of your anorexics will not give you much information. On the other hand, some of your compulsive overeaters will give you all the information that they have, plus some. Some of them are over talkers, not all, but some. We can over talk, so you don't have to worry about getting information from a compulsive overeater, but your anorexics really are usually so withdrawn into themselves and into the disease, and they feel bad. They're cold. They're weak. They can't take in information very fast, depending on how long they've been in it and how low their weight got. The refeeding process is, I can't tell you how hard it is on them and how hard it is on the staff. It is. And our staff patiently works with them. And they are going to eat here. We do not do tube feeding, and they will either eat here or they will be discharged. And it's amazing. I don't know. It is a God deal. Usually by 10 days, the eating of an eating disorder client has gotten in within they're eating. They are feeding themselves. Now, sometimes it's slow, and I'll tell you, they come in much like the compulsive overeater. Now, they're not happy. They're not too happy. They're withdrawn, and, they don't have a lot to say, majority of our anorexics. But if you want to see anger come up in an anorexic, watch them in the refeeding stage. That's when they get angry. That's when they'll throw the food across the room at you. That is when they'll call you every name and plus your mother names. They will call you ugly names when you start that refeeding process. Now, this is not all anorexics. It's not. Some of them will sit and just cry through the meals. And this is why our staff is so good. They'll sit with them. But I'll tell you, our staff, and we work diligently to work with them on their codependency. And if they can't, set boundaries, they do not need to be working in an eating disorder unit or any type of treatment center like this. They do not need to overlove the client. And your anorexics demand that. It's almost they draw people to them because they look so pitiful, and sick. And if you get, particularly our techs, or you get a staff person that is a caretaker, they absolutely could kill a very good anorexic by living them to death. And so we have to work with the staff. We want them to treat them with love, dignity, and respect, and firmness. Sometimes you have to get firm with them. You have to really, use your voice with them, not raise your voice. When I first went into business, I'm sorry to say, and I'm still finding people that I treated years ago, and I still make my amends. I hadn't worked on all of my rage and anger. I had not. And I brought it in to the treatment center where I owned the treatment center and was working with clients because I was in recovery from my eating disorder, and that rage had not been worked on. So I'm saying that to say we do not let our staff take their anger or their problems out on our clients. If we see that, we'll either get them help or get them out the door. So, your staff is very important in who you have assembled to work with any addict, particularly your eating disorder clients. So, I've said a lot. I don't know if you've heard a lot. I just want to say that eating disorders are not, they do not discriminate. Discriminate. There's men who have eating disorders. It's harder for men to get the courage to go to treatment, harder than women, because eating disorders are still considered women's diseases. They are not. They are diseases of people, regardless of the race, your color, where you've come from. It doesn't matter. It's not selective. It can affect anyone. An eating disorder can. So be aware. And a lot of times, you look at your family systems, and a lot of times, I'm not putting dads back down, but a lot of times, dads want their wives to be thin, and they'll say things about their wives' bodies, and that young girl standing there, that kid is listening to it, and they pick it up, and they know that in order to get dad's approval, they need to look good too. Many eating disorders are started in the home like that, from dads looking and saying things about the child's body as well as the mother's body. If you're going to make a compliment to someone, and people we all need compliments. If you're going to make a compliment to someone, don't let it include body size. And it is so easy to want to see somebody that has lost a lot of weight. We don't compliment them when they are 80 pounds, 70 pounds. But when you've seen somebody that's lost a lot of weight, it is so hard not to make that the focus, please don't talk about bodies. Don't make compliments about a person's body, because like me, I lost 100, 130, 145 different times. And when I would lose the weight and keep it off a short time, I got compliments, I got phone calls, wanting to know what I'd done, how I had lost the weight. People at church would, wait for me out the door to talk to me about what diet I was on then, and they'd all go on it. A lot of them would lose the weight. I'd gain it back. I had a lot of shame, because after I'd gained the weight back, I'd go in, or I would quit going places. Mainly I'd quit going places. I had so much shame about my body, and my motto was, love me, love my fat. If you can't love me fat, you won't love me thin. So be careful about what, and that goes to all of us, what we say about bodies and people's body size. Find something else to compliment them about. Or you could say, you really look beautiful. That covers it all, And another thing is, there's no money to treat eating disorders. There's no money, unless people have money. Yesterday, our beloved friend and former client here, Ashley Judd, she came here, and I'm not breaking her confidentiality, because she was here in 2006. And I've never had a client ever, to do the work to recover. I've had a few. I've had to see some right here on this screen. I take that back. I see some right on this screen that have done the work diligently to recover. And not only has Ashley done that, but she continues to do it, and then she spreads the word to everyone. So she was here when we opened up after, I guess it was before Christmas, for alumni to come for a tune-up. She came for a tune-up. And what she did, she said, I want to do a video about shades, and I want to put it on Facebook and Instagram. I want to get the word out there. So she did, and it came out yesterday. And she talked about what she got here. So I'm saying that to say we have gotten so many, I've seen on her feed, so many people needing help, or their children needing help, or their wives needing help, or their somebody needing help for an eating disorder. And this just happened yesterday. And there's many of them. Well, we want to come there. I want to send my child there, but there's no money and there's no insurance. A lot of times insurance will not pay for eating disorders. They will for anorexics, particularly if you've got them in a psych unit. It's hard to get insurance companies still in today's time to pay for eating disorders. Some will, very few. Cindy, our insurance person, is on here. She can attest to that. So I'm saying this to say some of the alumni have started and this has been quite a few years ago, I can't remember, we were having an intensive. I had an intensive for alumni. And it was really to learn how to have fun. And I'll tell you, we had fun. We had 6 women there, and we had fun for 5 days. And it was really focused on recovery and how to have fun in recovery and to get a little tune up along the way. So those women started talking, and I started talking about how it's hard to get people in treatment because lack of money. So they started talking. And there was a couple of people who had some money, and they started a foundation called Hope of Shades Foundation. That is not Shades Foundation. It's a separate foundation, Hope of Shades. And that is strictly to get eating disorder people treatment. And they don't all have to be referred to Shades. Now, they refer most of them, but if it was something that we couldn't treat, absolutely they'd be referred somewhere else. But if you ever want to donate to anything, if you're grateful for your recovery, donate to the Hope of Shades. You know, this last 2 years, and she's not on here, but Michelle, what's her last name? Anyway, Michelle was our president for 2 years, or a year, I don't know. Anyway, in that time, they did a few fundraising, and they didn't have a lot of people worked up, but they collected $65,000. They sent 3 people here for inpatient because we worked with them. I mean, we can't completely scholarship people anymore. We used to, we can't do it and keep the doors open. So we would help scholarship. They would help scholarship, we would help. So we got 3 people here for inpatient. And then they sent, I think, 7 for intensives. We can do much better than that, folks, you know, and it's going to have to come from people who have recovered from eating disorders because, you know, people do not want to donate to anything. They will donate to causes for children, for wars, or cancer, heart trouble. But you try to collect money for people with eating disorders, most people want, you know, and drugs and alcohol. Now, alcoholics and drug addicts in every state in this United States can get treatment from the government. That is mandated that they get treated for drugs and alcohol. That is not so for eating disorders. There's no government agent that I know of that will pay for treatment of eating disorders. So I did not intend to talk about this, but I am talking about it, that there is such a need for funding for eating disorders, whether they come here or not. That's not what this is about. It is about getting people the help that they need. Because I want to read you the statistics that I found. This is the reason I'm talking about it. There are 28.8 million people who have eating disorders. 28.8 people who have eating disorders. And it takes most of them at least 6 years to get treatment, and only a small, I think it's 10%, maybe 10% of eating disorder people who ever receive treatment. That includes your anorexics, your bulimics, your compulsive overeaters, your morbidly obese. Now, what they do get, your bulimics and your compulsive overeaters, your morbidly obese, they get prescribed diet pills by doctors. They get put on diets. They, are told to drink this kind of shake, that kind of shake, eat this kind of dried food, and don't forget to put the check in the mail for it. You know, it is a $1 billion lose of weight business. Don't fall. You know, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. Eating disorders cannot be treated by diet. It's not what you're eating, but what's eating you. we must look at those underlying causes and conditions. I started with this and I'll end with this. I don't know what other treatment centers do, but if you know of anyone that is, and this will be on YouTube, if you know of anyone that is looking for treatment, make sure that they go to, because we lose them. We lose a lot of people because their insurance will pay in psychiatric hospitals where they won't pay here. We lose a lot of them. So make sure that they do treat those underlying core issues and treat them with something, other modalities other than talk therapy. You know, there's psychological interventions that can be made if treatment centers will make them and do the hard work. It is much more than putting them in a group or sitting down individually and letting them talk. It's much more than that. You know, talk therapy is good to get your story straight, but after that, you begin to live your story. You've got to make changes. You've got to make daily changes, hourly changes. So it does sound like I have stopped sharing and gone to preaching because I can do that. But this is a subject that is dear to my own heart because I almost died of bulimia and compulsive overeating, seeking help every day of my life since I was 13 years old. I went to my first diet doctor at 13 and went to my first psychiatrist that I paid by working at a theater, and I remember paying that man $125 an hour, and that was over 60 years ago. And the sucker went to sleep. So I have been looking for help all of my life, and I never found it until this. I found this book by Dr. Judy Hollis. That treatment center is not there anymore. It only stayed there 1 year. But if you're going to go to treatment, or you're going to go send somebody to treatment, or you know somebody going for eating disorder treatment, make sure that they at least introduce you to the 12 steps. You know, I believe in the 12 steps because that's how people recover. Now, if you can find another way, go for it. I'm for whatever helps a person. But if you're going to treatment and you're going to pay for treatment and you go in and they don't look at those underlying causes and conditions, you need to demand your money back. And I'll tell you, eating disorder treatment is expensive. You know, people say it's expensive here, but most treatment centers, are a 42-day unit, and what we charge, it's usually either doubled or tripled in other treatment centers for 30 days. Make sure you know where you're going or where you're sending someone. Make sure they're treating those underlying causes and conditions. I've taken up all the time, so anybody have anything you want to say or add? Because I know that there's some, okay, I see